Welcome back to a brand new season of The Global Current, where Seton Hall's diplomacy students give you a fresh look on what's going on in the world. I'm Alicia Sharabali. This week in the world, election protests in Cambodia. Yet another airspace dispute between Syria and Turkey. The mining industry in Afghanistan. Maritime disputes between Nicaragua and Colombia. U.S. monetary policy effects on the global market, and a special event coverage on the new president in Iran. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show. And now, Cambodia gripped by election protests by staffer Atayo Akanji.
The opposition party in Cambodia has led protests and campaigns against July's election in the country based on allegations of fraud and electoral malpractices against the ruling People's Party, CPP. Intense protests and more recently violence has continued to trail the disputed July elections in Cambodia. About 20,000 protesters made up of activists, workers, and monks gathered at a public park in the capital, Phnom Penh, on Sunday, September 16th, to call for investigations into the allegations of electoral fraud committed by the incumbent Prime Minister Hun Sen during the election. 61-year-old Prime Minister Hun Sen has ruled Cambodia for the past 28 years and will soon begin another term in office after his Cambodia's People's Party won 68 seats compared to the 55 won by the opposition Cambodia National Rescue Party, CNRP. The opposition, led by Sam Rainsy, has vehemently rejected the results of the July polls, calling for independent investigations into the allegations of fraud.
Sam Rainsy has been the figure of Cambodia's political opposition since he returned this year after living in exile in France.
There has been a dictatorship in this country for nearly 40 years, but now I think there will be a democratic change.
But that might not come anytime soon. His party competed in the national elections but is poised to lose a majority of the parliamentary seats yet again. The opposition is calling on the government to form an independent committee that will investigate allegations of massive vote rigging when ballots were cast more than 6 weeks ago. But that might be too late. In the coming days, the National Election Committee is expected to announce the ruling Cambodia's People's Party as the winner of this election. Prime Minister Hun Sen is the longest-serving leader in Southeast Asia. He's seen to have firm control over the army, the police, and nearly every institution in the country. But for the more than 15,000 supporters that rallied in Phnom Penh, they believe this election has shaken Hun Sen's grip on power.
There's too much corruption. It's everywhere. It starts from the lowest position all the way to the top.
I voted for the opposition because of the policies. I am disappointed with the government. They promised many things, but they didn't deliver.
More than 70% of the Cambodians here are below 30 years old. Many of them say what they want is job security, they want education, and they want justice. They say they want change, and that the government of Prime Minister Hun Sen is the politics of a bygone era.
The rise of a youthful opposition to Hun Sen is described by many here as a Cambodian spring. Sam Rainsy's party has gathered unprecedented support in this election. But some are questioning how long the group can maintain its momentum. Jamala Lindogan, Al Jazeera, Phnom Penh, Cambodia.
Although most of the protest has been peaceful, things took a violent turn last Sunday, September 15. One man was killed and almost 5 others were rushed to the hospital. According to the Phnom Penh Post, 29-year-old Mao Sok Chan was shot through the forehead during the clash at the Baltna overpass. Chan Sovet, a senior investigator with the Cambodian Human Rights and Development Association, reported that 4 other people were rushed to the Calmette Hospital with severe bullet wounds to their legs, eyes, and neck. He said more than 10 people were arrested and at least 10 people were injured. The opposition leader and the Prime Minister met on Monday, the 17th of September, to peacefully negotiate an agreement. The Guardian reported negotiations ended with a 3-point plan, promising to calm the situation without the use of violence, continue discussions between the two parties, and reform of the National Election Commission, which oppositions believed colluded with the ruling party to rig the elections last July. Prime Minister Hun Sen came into power after a violent coup in 1997 and has been in power ever since. Cambodia has witnessed one of the best economic growth rates in Asia, with growth averaging 6% in the last 10 years. Trade in textiles, agriculture, construction, and tourism has continued to attract foreign investment and international trade. Sheikh Sidi Dahara, the least developed country under Secretary General at the United Nations, stated that Cambodia could outgrow its LDC status by the year 2020. It's been Eitayo Akanji for the Global Current.
Last Monday, Turkish forces shot down a Syrian helicopter after an airspace violation. Staffer Dina El Sayed tells us more.
Istanbul. A Turkish warplane shot down a Syrian helicopter that had violated Turkish airspace on Monday. Turkish armed forces said that the Mi-17 attack helicopter had strayed into Turkish territory and was warned repeatedly before 2 Turkish F-11 warplanes were dispatched to shoot it down. The helicopter crashed 1 kilometer or just over half a mile inside Syria. The Syrian army accused Turkey of deliberately trying to escalate tensions after a Turkish fighter jet hastily brought down a Syrian military helicopter along the unstable frontier. The Syrian army confirmed that it had lost a helicopter that it said was on a reconnaissance mission and had mistakenly crossed into Turkish territory. The Syrian Army Command denounced Turkey's reaction as hasty and said it was evidence of what it called real intentions of Erdogan's government towards Syria, which is seeking escalation at the borders of the two countries. Relations have deteriorated between Damascus and Ankara, who were once close allies since the outbreak of an anti-Assad uprising and resulting crackdown on dissidents by the regime in March 2011. The Turkish military said it had begun tracking the Syrian helicopter at 1:41 p.m., where the aircraft was 26 nautical miles from the border, and that warnings had been repeatedly until it was about 5 miles away. Air defense elements continued to warn the Syrian helicopter of its infringement on Turkish territory. Upon the continuation of the violation, it was determined that it fell into Syrian territory after being shot down at 2:25 p.m. Officials released radar tracking that showed what the military said was the path of the helicopter, hugging the borders in Syria's Idlib province for a time before crossing into Turkish territory. The Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu said, "No one will have the courage to violate Turkish airspace again," during a UN meeting in Paris. The helicopter had crashed less than a mile inside Syrian territory. On Monday in Ankara, the Turkish Deputy Prime Minister Bülent Arınç said there was no information on the fate of helicopter's crew, but the director of the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said rebel fighters captured one of the pilots, while the fate on other crew was unclear. Dina El-Sayed for the Global Current.
Before moving on, we want to let you know about the Global Citizen Festival in New York City, featuring artists Stevie Wonder, Kings of Leon, Alicia Keys, and John Mayer. This year's show focuses on progression to end extreme poverty by 2030. If you weren't lucky enough to get tickets to the show, you can pre-register to stream the show live on festival.globalcitizen.org. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, along with several other world leaders, will attend this event. Check it out and join them in the movement. And now, in analysis, staffer Adam Burgdorf examines the mining industry of Afghanistan and how it may be doing more harm than good.
Afghanistan is a country rich in metal and mineral deposits, with an estimated $1 to $3 trillion worth of untapped mineral resources, including $421 billion in iron and $273 billion in copper. Afghanistan is virtually sitting on a gold mine. Unfortunately, decades of political and military strife have left this potential wealth unrealized. International finance organizations, such as the World Bank, have pushed Afghanistan to fast-track its development of the mining sector so as to spur economic growth in the country. But is this the right strategy for Afghanistan? While Afghanistan's resource wealth certainly needs to be developed for the country to prosper, it needs to be reactive to Afghanistan's current situations and conscious of the nation's future needs. Developing the mining and mineral industry in Afghanistan has several clear benefits. Foremost, growing the mining sector will grow the national economy. The World Bank estimates that the 2 largest mining operations in Afghanistan could provide upward of 90,000 jobs and a return of $500 million in fiscal revenue. Officials in the government hope to grow overall mining revenue as large as $4 billion annually by 2024. The numbers stand in significant relief against Afghanistan's current mining revenue, which stood at just $150 million in 2012. Mining has also provided Afghanistan the leverage to acquire significant foreign direct investment. The United Kingdom has already begun funding over £10 million in a mining development project for Afghanistan. One of the largest mining projects, the INAC copper mining operation, is funded through a $3 billion investment by state-owned China Metallurgical Group and Jiangxi Copper Consortium. Finally, growth in the mining sector would go hand in hand with developing Afghanistan's physical infrastructure systems. Along with initial investments for mine development, the World Bank estimates an additional $2 to $5 billion investments may be necessary for Afghanistan to upgrade its transportation, power, and water systems. Many international mining deals have contained specific provisions for the development of Afghanistan's infrastructure, such as China's bid on the INAC copper mining rights. China sweetened this deal by including specific contract provisions not only to develop a mine, but to include a railroad development project, a 400-megawatt power plant for the region, and a smelting plant. With so many positive economic benefits, it's easy to see why Afghanistan has been quick to capitalize on its mineral resources. Unfortunately, in the rush to start digging, Afghanistan may have overlooked some serious shortcomings. The boom in the mining industry also brought with it a boom in corruption. A 2012 report by the Civil Military Fusion Center detailed the many layers of corruption that are impeding Afghanistan's development in its metals industry. These layers vary from bribing local officials for permits and worker visas to the outright collusion between the government and the international business elite for exclusive access to commercial opportunities. Afghanistan has failed to put in place adequate safeguards against corruption before embarking on its mining development program, a mistake that it has been laboriously trying to make up for ever since. In an interview with the BBC, Afghanistan's finance minister, Dr. Omar Zakawal, described his country's efforts to fight the corruption in the mining sector.
Transparency, transparency, transparency. And that's what we are trying to do, and we have achieved, like I said, again, to the principles of EITI. We have fully signed on. We are close to being a member there. A law that again provides a more transparent environment. What needed to be done is done. And again, like I told you, we're more transparent today than we were last year. Certainly way more transparent than we were a couple of years ago. We're committed to be even more transparent. Every contract that's been signed in the mining has been put up on the websites and has been sort of public knowledge.
Afghanistan's mining industry has caused more problems than just corruption, though. The major coal mine collapse at Abqaiq this month that killed at least 24 workers and injured nearly 100 others has highlighted Afghanistan's lax regulations on the mining industry. Some mines currently operating in Afghanistan employ children as young as 10 years old, blatantly disregarding national child labor laws. Environmental impacts also weigh heavy with critics of Afghanistan's developing mining sector. An Arch International report on the INAC copper mine noted that it is difficult to assess the environmental impact of the INAC mines as China Metallurgical Group still has not filed an environmental impact plan. This fact is even more troubling when considering that the INAC mines are in close proximity to the primary water supply in the country's best agricultural area. Despite concerns over worker safety and the environment, Afghanistan officials and lawmakers continue to push ahead with mine development projects and have continued to make laws more investor-friendly. One such bill would place creating environmental controls on mining at the sole discretion of the Ministry of Mines. The bill also removed the requirement for Parliament to approve all new major mining deals, removing public scrutiny of these deals and concentrating power in the Ministry of Mines. Additionally, in the rush to exploit the many natural resources of Afghanistan, officials may have overlooked another important issue: Afghanistan's history. Many mining operations in Afghanistan pose a serious threat to Afghanistan's rich archaeological heritage. The ongoing saga of the INAC copper mine project provides a textbook example of the conflict between preservation and progress. The ancient Buddhist city of Mez Aynak dates back nearly 2,500 years, But archaeologists have also uncovered evidence of settlements in the area dating back nearly 5,000 years. Positioned at a critical intersection of the Silk Road trade routes, Mez Aynak was a prosperous and culturally thriving city. What's more, the ruins of this city have yet to be fully excavated by modern archaeologists, who believe the city contains a treasure trove of information on the region's role in the ancient world. Mez Aynak, however, is in danger of complete destruction, as it sits on top of one of the world's largest deposits of copper. In order to reach this deposit, the China Metallurgical Group plans to dig a strip mine at the site, effectively leveling the ancient city, claiming they remained oblivious to the site's existence and only found out about it after the contracts were signed. Documentarian Brett Huffman has been filming the race to excavate and preserve as many artifacts from this site as possible before the bulldozers move in. In an interview with PBS, Huffman discussed what the people of Afghanistan may lose if this site is destroyed.
So then you sort of saw all these different cultures influencing each other. And some of the finds in Mez Aynak sort of show that. There's statues and artifacts found made from material, that comes from Pakistan or that comes from Iraq or China or India. Afghans will be losing a huge part of how important their own history is and how influential Afghanistan was to the rest of the world.
Cultural heritage sites can form a backbone of economic development, something Afghanistan's officials might consider before the next major mining project. Although it is difficult to fault just Afghanistan for this unfortunate situation, international opinions seem equally conflicted over this site. UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, has recently begun several campaigns emphasizing the benefits of developing cultural heritage sites as sustainable economic generators for development that benefit from tourism and academic study. But the World Bank, in a report titled Aynak and Mining in Afghanistan, emphasized an excavation and salvage strategy at Mez Aynak, endorsing the loss of this historic site in the name of progress. The people of Afghanistan must find a balance when utilizing their natural resources, a feat they have yet to accomplish. While Afghanistan's untapped resources give an immense advantage when it comes to post-war reconstruction, they need to be careful not to outpace the national capacity to control this growth. The rush to reap profits from mining should not override the most basic needs for worker safety, and the short-term profits from minerals should not overshadow the long-term environmental impacts that mining can have. Afghanistan must be careful not to be blinded by the dazzling profits mining can afford. Instead, they must keep focused on the goal of long-term, sustainable growth. Adam Burgdorf, The Global Current.
Staffer Stephanie Siegel will review the ongoing maritime dispute between Nicaragua and Colombia.
On September 17th, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, announced that, quote, Nicaragua instituted proceedings against Colombia asking the court to indefinitely determine the question of the delimitation of the continental shelf between Nicaragua and Colombia in the area beyond 200 nautical miles from the Nicaraguan coast. This portion of the high seas has long been contested by both states and has served as a point of polarization throughout Latin America. Nicaragua and Colombia lay claim to this area, and both count it as part of their national territory. Similar to the dispute between China and Japan, the conflict between these Latin American states remains at a standstill as Colombia is refusing to recognize the ICJ's late 2012 decision, which granted Nicaragua sovereignty over 60% of the territory. The latest fight over the islands comes from Nicaragua's proclamation that it will begin drilling for oil, despite Colombia's dissatisfaction with the ruling. Quote, Colombians are still outraged by the ruling of The Hague's International Court of Justice, which pretends to give Nicaragua a significant portion of our historic and economic rights in the Caribbean, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos said. We will subscribe a letter of protest along with other neighboring nations that I will personally deliver to the United Nations Secretary General, Santos added. Nicaragua's latest petition to the ICJ has created quite a stir within the region, increasing insecurity and alarm in states such as Costa Rica and Panama. President Ricardo Martinelli of Panama has echoed Colombia's displeasure and confirmed that he will participate in bringing this matter to Secretary General Moon. The origins of this disagreement began in 1928 when the Esguerra-Bárcenas Treaty signed between Colombia and Nicaragua gave Colombia sovereignty over all the islands. Nicaragua disputes this arrangement on two counts. First, it contends that because it was under U.S. occupation when the treaty was signed, it was coerced into signing the treaty. International law dictates that a state may back out of a treaty if it can provide sufficient evidence that it was coerced into the signing. If Nicaragua can illustrate that the U.S. occupation led to coercion, then the Esguerra-Bárcenas Treaty will no longer be legally binding. Secondly, as the ICJ has made clear, the, quote, Esguerra-Bárcenas Treaty contradicts international regulations that give countries the right to control an area of the sea that lies within 200 nautical miles off their shores. Though Nicaragua currently has a legal right to the majority of the island, it should postpone any drilling until the ICJ addresses Nicaragua's petition for a clear delineation of the territorial boundaries under dispute. Nicaragua may see any delay on its part to be a sign of weakness. However, given that international regulations are on its side, Nicaragua will receive great gains from deferring to international law and the legal process, and this demonstrates civility within the region. After the final decision is produced by the ICJ, both Colombia and Nicaragua will need to adhere to the new boundaries. Though one state is guaranteed to be disappointed, it is imperative that international law is upheld for present-day peace and future regional cooperation. Stephanie Siegel, The Global Current.
Finally, in analysis, staffer Fadishola Uchekari evaluates the effect of the U.S. monetary policy decisions on international markets.
The United States Federal Reserve shocked financial markets when it stated on September 18th that it would continue the economic stimulus program by buying bonds at a rate of $85 billion a month. Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke stated that there needed to be more proof that the economy was ready for a cutback on the stimulus program. The Federal Open Market Committee, referred to as FOMC, said, "The committee sees the improvement in economic activity and labor market conditions since it began its asset purchase program a year ago as consistent with growing underlying strength in the broader economy. However, the committee decided to await more evidence that progress will be sustained before adjusting the pace of its purchases," reports Politico. Federal Reserve officials spent most of the summer discussing a possible taper on the economic stimulus program, the New York Times reports. But international markets were not fond of the idea. The Fed hinted at tapering the program, which caused a volatile reaction in foreign countries. Economist Garrett Baldwin wrote the capital flight followed the talks about tapering. When capital flight occurred, the currencies in emerging markets were damaged. The currencies of India and Turkey fell to a new all-time low, and Indonesia's currency, the rupiah, also fell to its lowest level since 2009, Baldwin explains. Stocks in eastern emerging economies like Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines plummeted. Then September arrived and the Fed stunned everyone, including the emerging economies. The Wall Street Journal reports that the U.S. Federal Reserve's surprise decision not to scale back its bond purchases has sparked a rally across emerging market assets. Though emerging economies were saved from further capital flight and further financial crises, money managers still find risks in these markets. Victor Szabo, portfolio manager at Aberdeen Asset Management, warns that Turkey and Indian markets are still volatile. There is a risk that policymakers will continue to be complacent and disregard the much-needed structural reforms their economies must implement in order to become more competitive. Analysts at Capital Economics continued saying that emerging markets had only received a temporary reprieve, and the larger issue lies within their deeper structural problems, citing countries with current account deficits such as South Africa, Turkey, Brazil, India, and Indonesia. They remarked that the Fed's decision yesterday not to taper its asset purchases just yet provides some breathing room for the more troubled emerging economies. Various financial markets could all face an even greater problem in the near future. Bernanke is worried about a government shutdown and failure to raise the debt limit. The Fed chairman also remarked that the congressional Republicans and the White House were hurtling toward an impasse over government spending. This has been Laura Toledo for Fadishola Ojekere.
Finally, staffer Heidi Erbson covers an event at Seton Hall University, a new president for Iran.
On June 14, 2013, politically moderate candidate Hassan Rouhani was elected as the 7th president of Iran in what the White House deemed a call by the Iranian people for change. In his inauguration on August 3, 2013, President Rouhani expressed a desire to end tensions with the international community. The international community is hopeful about the new president's apparently moderate policies and perceived amiable approach to international negotiations. Yet, founder and president of the American Iranian Council, Dr. Houshang Amirahmadi, warns that new policies will not be enough to completely heal Iranian-U.S. relations. On September 9th, in an address to the School of Diplomacy at Seton Hall University, Dr. Amirahmadi explained the basis for Iranian foreign policy making and projected the implications of the recent election on the international community. As an expatriate of Iran and presidential hopeful himself in the 2013 presidential elections, Dr. Amirahmadi congratulated the Iranian people on their success in electing a moderate president. But he went on to hint that Rouhani's new policies will only take baby steps towards the drastic distance needed to close the gap on Iranian foreign relations. According to Dr. Amirahmadi, Iranian foreign policy is based on two pillars.
Iran's foreign policy is based on two pillars. One is the one pillar we call the revolution, and the second is pragmatism in daily life.
While Rouhani has based his foreign policy on improving relations with the West, we must remember that the new president has signed a constitution which is embedded in these pillars. This constitution prioritizes foreign policy relations.
Iran's foreign policy also, from the day one, established a priority, but it continues to honor. And the priority included, first, they would say, we wanted to work closely with our neighbors. Second, with the Islamic countries. Third, with the region, and somehow a little bit beyond the region, perhaps. And then overseas. And overseas means the United States in particular. And therefore, in the priority list of the Islamic Republic, the United States comes absolutely first.
Therefore, while Rouhani has pledged to change the international image of Iran through increased cooperation in the international community, the institutional restraints within Iran may prevent the significant progress expected between Iran and the international community. With the international community at a critical crossroads of the ongoing war on terrorism and the civil war in Syria, Iranian foreign policymakers are forced to acknowledge the international pressures to improve human rights mechanisms and counter-terrorism measures. Addressing these international issues are well within the interest of the Iranian population, according to Dr. Amirahmadi.
Terrorism, that is embedded in US Iranian relations, my friends, again. Who we have been fighting over the last 10 years? Al-Qaeda, Taliban, right? And they are also enemies of Iran.
However, the internationally condemned uranium enrichment program in Iran, as well as the country's unwavering support for groups the United States deems as terrorist, namely Hezbollah and Hamas, have caused a disconnect in these similar interests.
The problem between US and Iran on terrorism, obviously, is Hezbollah and Hamas. And Iran calls them freedom fighters, and US and Israel call them terrorists.
Ultimately, for improvements in Iranian-U.S. relations to occur, negotiations and concessions will have to be made on both sides. Both the U.S. and Iran must realize their common interest and stop issuing impossible hard-line ultimatums. President Rouhani has expressed his openness to international negotiations. However, as a new president, making too many concessions too soon can undermine his regime within the Iranian government. If the international community expects that this new presidency and policy of open international dialogue is an invitation to pressure Iran into completely halting its nuclear program or taking drastic counterterrorism measures, it should think again. While the election of this new president signifies progress in U.S.-Iranian relations, the international community should recognize that the governmental restraints within Iran make that progress only a stepping stone for now. As Dr. Amirahmadi stated, there is no hostility towards the U.S. in the minds of the Iranian people. It's all in the government. While the Iranian people are working to change their government internally, the international community needs to be cautious about its expectations for Iranian participation in controversial international initiatives. In the long run, this will avoid undermining progress within the country and ensure the people's hopes for further integration into the international community. This has been Heidi Erbson for The Global Current.
Thank you for tuning in to the new season of The Global Current. Check us out on blogs.shu.edu/globalcurrent and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. This has been Alicia Sharabali, and we'll see you next week.